Well, folks, we're back with another AMA with Hearthstone developer Iksar, and some big topics in this one, like an expansion that's bigger than normal coming sometime next year. This is like a teaser that's over a year out. We got some conversation about how much card draw is in Hearthstone, and even streamer-based heroes in Battlegrounds. Could Crip be a Battlegrounds hero? Apparently it's not the craziest idea. So let's go ahead and jump into this one. All right, so let's kick things off here with this conversation about drawing a bunch of cards. The question was, what are your opinions on classes and decks drawing through their deck really quickly and doing it so consistently? Iksar does recognize it's a concern, which is a big relief to hear. This is something that's been frustrating me a lot lately in Hearthstone, so I'm glad that's on the dev team's mind. And he goes on to say that, with tradable as a keyword in this expansion in particular, this one has a lot of card draw. So they've been leaning pretty heavily on card draw in this set, and that it's a tough balance to find. They think card draw is fun because it gives you a lot of options in hand. If you have 10 cards in hand, that's 10 choices. If you have 2 cards in hand, that's only 2 choices that you get to make. And in the past, they've used random generation to achieve that. We had the lackey meta where you're just adding a bunch of random cards to your hand. People complained about how that RNG felt bad because you never had any predictability. And now we've almost gone the other way where it's just ultimate predictability because your opponent has their entire deck in hand half the time, or a third of their deck in hand in many cases, or is drawing through it all in just a few turns. Now, there is an aspect of this I think is worth discussing. There might be sort of a notion that having more cards in hand leads to more diverse outcomes in games, but I don't actually think that's true. I think the more cards and more choices you have in hand, actually the more narrow the outcomes become in games. In other words, when you only have a couple choices, sometimes you have to make sacrifices, suboptimal lines, play things that don't exactly line up perfectly, and it creates more divergent experiences in the game. But when both players have a full gamut of choices in hand and they're playing their best cards every turn and often driving towards their own specific win conditions, say like in a quest deck, what you get are games that actually feel samey all the time because everybody's just got the best choices all the time. There are never these back and forth with suboptimal turns because games are unfolding perfectly, driving towards these various win conditions. So, if the idea is that more options is more fun, sometimes I think it might actually be more fun to give us less options so that you have to be a little bit more creative with your resources. There's a bit more of a rhythm where it's kind of a give and take over the course of a game. Like, I'm taking a downturn, I'm making some sacrifices now because my hand's not perfect. Maybe the opponent has a good turn now, but maybe next turn their hand's not perfect. And you create this sort of ebb and flow throughout the course of a game that I think makes games feel more unique. Whereas right now, when you're drawing your entire deck, you're just always sort of doing the best thing over and over again. So I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on that. I kind of just thought through that, and I don't know if it makes a ton of sense, but I wonder if worse choices and less options are actually in some cases more fun and more enjoyable because they create different game states and different scenarios instead of things unfolding the same all the time. So here's a question. Will quest lines be revamped once they rotate to wild format? And I like this response. I suspect that quests are the topic of today, and by the time they rotate to wild, players will be focused on a different topic. Smiley face. So for me, this is sort of saying yes, quests are very powerful and meta defining right now, but I think Iksar's hinting that they will not be very powerful and meta defining by the time they rotate. That's basically well over a year from now when they will rotate. So, that's probably true. Usually these sort of meta defining cards don't last beyond their expansion because the next thing has come out and is much more powerful. And Wild does have some permanence. Things stick through Wild, through metas, and hang around. And I'm sure there will be 1 or 2 quests that are still good for a while into the future. But I suspect they won't feel super powerful or overwhelming compared to the latest card. So I don't think we'll need to go back and revisit Wild quests either. So this is a question about perception versus balance when it comes to changing, nerfing cards. In other words, are nerfs based on numbers and percentages and win rates, or are they just based on feel? And Iksar confirms that most changes that are made are based on feel, and that in fact very few decks or cards really ever exceed their thresholds for balance problems from a win rate standpoint. And I always see a lot of conversation among the player base whether this should be a thing or not, like if cards should be balanced based on feel. So I'm curious to hear everyone's perspective. And for me, I think I'm definitely in favor of changes based on feel and perception. For a couple reasons. Number one, it's first and foremost a game, and games are about having fun. So fun is a valuable and important metric to consider. It's a hard one to measure and a hard one to gauge because different people's definitions of fun are different. But I'll leave that challenging task to Blizzard. But number two, on top of that, I think changes just lead to freshness. They lead to new experiences. New decks can take the forefront. And that, I think, is really good for the game as well. And if you only balanced based on numerical values and win percentages, you probably wouldn't have as many excuses to change things, which means the meta would get more stale. It might be solved and balanced, but it might also be kind of flat and boring. So I'm in favor of this particular approach to balance changes. I am a little curious here that decks rarely exceed that 54 to 55% win rate. I feel like we see numbers bigger than that on HS Replay, but of course, those are all different data sets, and Blizzard has the real data there. All right, here's a question about the dev team preferring low or high power sets. Which are better? Iksar says we'd probably pick high power over low power. High power sets get a lot of complaints, and people get very emotional about high power sets, like we've seen in United and Stormwind. But low power sets mean players get bored and quit. And that's sort of the Rastakan's Rumble set, right? It's just like no cards did anything, and arguably that made people pretty bored. As far as the quit side of things, I'm going to have to trust the internal data here. We don't see that. If Iksar is saying that people quit more for boring sets, I have no reason to doubt that. I will say, a lot of people are reporting quitting right now because of high-powered sets and getting frustrated with the meta. So I suspect both cause people to quit to some extent, but we don't really know the numbers. We don't know if that's a vocal minority or not. But the takeaway here, the key thing is that obviously we'd rather be somewhere in the middle, and that's great, right? I think that's what we all want. A set that's kind of notable and significant, but doesn't feel like it's ramped the game into a totally new level of power, which I do feel like Stormwind has certainly done. I'll also perhaps challenge the notion a little bit that power is the only way to make a set exciting. I think you can keep power levels relatively flat, but introduce concepts, mechanics, and maybe even complexity that makes the game more interesting without ramping up the power. So it might be possible to build hype and excitement and freshness without pushing power a ton. You probably have to push the power just a little, but maybe they've relied a little bit too much on pushing the power as opposed to pushing the kind of creativity or excitement. Now, that's very easy to say, obviously, somebody on the sidelines, so that's not an easy thing to do. It's a lot easier to push those knobs or turn those knobs where you just make cards a little stronger. It's a lot harder to make creative and fun concepts. So no real criticism here, but just that it might be possible to achieve this in sort of a different vector. All right, so here's a big question. What's the next priority after Mercenaries? Because it sounds like a lot of people have been working really hard on Mercenaries for years at this point, and it's finally about to be released. Iksar says improving Battlegrounds with progression, cosmetics, and system or gameplay improvements. And then this is really cool. A bigger than normal expansion slated for late next year. So the third expansion of 2022 is going to be a bigger expansion. And I guess that probably just means more cards than normal. I don't know if there's a reason for that or if that's going to be a regularly scheduled thing. I already have a theory. Iksar previously teased that Titans might be showing up someday in Hearthstone. Maybe this will be like a Titan theme expansion where who knows what that bigger angle means, but maybe just literally more card types or just crazy Titan effects or just a ton of cards to support that. That's my theory, but I have zero clue. I'm curious what you guys think. And then keeping up with content, sure, and brainstorming the next big things. So it sounds like a little bit of a sort of consolidation period here after Mercenaries, going back, tweaking some of the current stuff, which I'm glad. I think Hearthstone's pushed really hard for new content. It'll be nice to go back and tighten up some of the things that are already happening, making sure all the current game modes and formats are in a good spot. So this one's crazy. Iksar here says they've talked about doing an update with streamers as Battlegrounds heroes. So, for instance, Kripparrian, the Stormwind Guard. He says, I'd like to do this, and Battlegrounds is a place where it would kind of fit, and community figures seem fun. I do not want to be a part of this. I'm not a Battlegrounds player, first off, so, I mean, at least only rarely. So I don't think I'd be on the list for this anyway, but I don't want to be in the game. I don't want to be the OP hero that ruins everybody's day. Leave that for Crip and Trump or something. Don't sign me up for this. But yeah, I guess in general, I'm not really a huge fan of this. Obviously, I have some friends I'd love to see in the game, and I'd be happy for them and such, but I don't know. It feels like it's an unnecessary sort of thing. Is this something you guys would actually be excited about? Is this something people would want, or would you rather just have like more cool Warcraft characters? I think most people would prefer more cool Warcraft characters. I think Blizzard's overestimating the importance or significance of streamers to the greater community. I think we're not worth all the trouble, but even crazy that this came up. Also, Blizzard has been taking a really hard stance about not referencing real people in their games lately. We've seen multiple references removed in World of Warcraft and Overwatch in regards to all the various lawsuits and sexual harassment, all these things going on at Blizzard, all this awful stuff. I thought it was sort of a policy that they weren't going to reference real people. Even Iksar talked about this in a previous AMA, how they were like trying not to reference real people in cards. So it's strange that this has already come back up, and it seems like it's still sort of a possibility. Maybe since they're outside the organization, they think it'd be okay, but so it's just, I don't really care. I don't think it's a problem, but I'm surprised Blizzard isn't taking a more hardline stance on that one in particular, just given all the other actions we've seen. So here's the topic a lot of people seem to have problems with. The fact that like Mercenaries and like regular constructed Hearthstone feel so different. A lot of people think like Mercenaries or Battlegrounds should be in their own client, which is a reasonable take. They are very different sorts of games. I mean, they really don't even use cards as such, like there are technically cards in Battlegrounds, but it's really more like objects, just, kind of entities on board mostly. Mercenaries is kind of going to feel the same way. There's no deck, I guess you should say is the right way to put that. There's really no deck that you're playing with. Anyway, Iksar addresses this saying, we're okay with having different experiences across each of the main game modes. He thinks they're basically in the same genre of slow strategy games, but indeed they feel like standalone experiences. That's very consistent with what Blizzard's been saying, is that Hearthstone is a platform for like these various strategy games that are all sort of connected. It's a little weird that they're not deck-based like the original Hearthstone. I'm cool with it, though. The button on the main menu still kind of bothers me, how it says Hearthstone on the main button instead of like Constructed or something. But whatever, it's fine. We all know how it works. So, I don't want it to go too far. I don't want Standard or Constructed Hearthstone to feel like, it's just totally left out in the cold while all these other brand new babies get all the attention and priorities. But I don't think it has felt that way so far, and I suspect it won't. I think pack sales are still very, very important for Blizzard. So I think Constructed will continue to get the attention it deserves. So here's a quick note. Sounds like diamond cards are coming for Scholomance, Outland, and Dark Moon, and a coin coming for Outland as well. So if you're looking for some cosmetics for the stuff that's still in standard rotation, there you go. It's on the way. Here's a question about splitting of the player base and if that could do things like increase queue times or cause problems. Iksar says not really. Games are fast and population size large enough. We don't have to worry about various modes having enough players. That's always comforting to hear that there's plenty of players out there. It's a little more concerning for like content creators like us, because videos only ever fit a certain slice of Hearthstone. So like, a standard video might have less and less audience over time, Battlegrounds, Mercenaries, etc. It's no problem. We'll figure it out. But seems like for the player base in general, who's the important thing, it really doesn't make much difference yet. We'll see if this remains the case over the next 5-10 years or something. But for now, glad to hear it's not an issue. And then finally, will we ever see console releases? Ever's a long time, but not anywhere in the near future. So console releases aren't impossible. Just don't expect one anytime soon, it sounds like. And there you go. That wraps it up for this week's AMA. Curious, as always, to hear your thoughts on all this stuff. What are you excited about? What do you dread? What on earth is this giant expansion going to be like? Share those takes down below. Thanks much, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.